I'm Casey. A lot of you know me from the Casa Verde, some from my tiny studio days. Now I'm on YouTube and I'm so excited. So I've lived in New York City for 6 years now and I've actually moved 5 times. 5 times, and it's been a journey. So I figured for my first video, I would take you guys on that journey with me. We're gonna be looking back at all the apartments that I've lived in and rating them on a scale of 1 to 10. Let's get into it. Apartment 1. Fulton Street. So this was my first apartment in New York City. I moved here, I kid you not, with a suitcase and a dream. And that's not an exaggeration. I watched way too many rom-coms growing up.
It's you.
It's me.
So I moved here and I was like, I'm gonna live in a 1-bedroom on the Upper West Side and it's gonna be amazing. And me and my minimum wage job ended up in Bedstuy, Brooklyn. And I paid $850 a month for this room. It's so funny looking at like old photos before I was into home decor. So like I said, this was pretty deep into Brooklyn, but the inside of the apartment was honestly huge and it was really nice. We even had a washer dryer, which I later came to learn is extremely rare in New York City. I had the smallest room, so I paid the least, but I did have this exposed brick wall that made my first year in New York feel like all the rom-com dreams that I had hoped of. I think the location really knocks this one down a lot for me. We lived pretty far from the train station and we were only near like one local train, so it took a very long time to get into Midtown Manhattan. At the time I was also working pretty crazy hours, so like very early in the morning and very late at night, and I didn't feel safe walking to the train every day, so it just wasn't a great experience. One of my biggest tips when looking for an apartment in New York is to go and see the area and the neighborhood, not only during the day but also at night, and make sure that you feel safe for both. Overall, I'm going to give this one a 6 out of 10. Moving on to apartment 2. This was in East Williamsburg and I paid $1650. And when I tell you I still think about this giant window daily, I'm not kidding. So me and one other roommate from the first apartment ended up moving into this apartment together. I found it on StreetEasy. I really loved it. It was clean, it was cozy. In terms of the location, we couldn't afford to live in like the poppin' part of Williamsburg. That's like pretty expensive. So we were kind of on the outskirts of it, but it was a really short walk there, which was a huge plus. This is also when I first started to dabble in home decor. I remember my mom came to visit us like a week after we moved in and she helped us set up the little living room area and the little like dining area in my room. I was so proud. It was my first hanging plant that I like hung up and I was like, I'm so cool, watch out. In terms of cons, this was a hefty one. Unfortunately, I did have a terrible experience here towards the end of my time there because I had a falling out with my roommate at the time. And I can laugh about it now, but looking back, I had a really tough time. I was in therapy, I was having anxiety attacks, like really just discomfort in my own home every day, and so we decided it'd be best for me to move out. I reached out to my building management and I got permission to find someone to sublease my room. Obviously had spoken to my roommate about this at the time and she was okay with it. So in terms of the apartment and the location alone, I would have given this place a 7 out of 10. But given the baggage, the trauma, if you will, of the experience, I'm gonna go ahead and give it a 4 out of 10. I do still think about that window though. Moving on to apartment 3, the famous tiny studio. Looking back at pictures of this one, it just like tugs at my heartstrings. So after the experience I had with my old roommate, I decided that I wanted to try living on my own and get my first studio in New York City, which I will say was not fun. Trying to find an apartment under $2,000 that I could get approved for in New York City was terrible. But I found a place and I was so lucky. I had so much support from my family and friends. Everyone was like cheering me on, helping me find a place, and we found one. So this was my first and only so far apartment in Manhattan. It was on the Upper East Side and I paid $19.50 a month. It was a great location. It was right next to this diner that always had families in it. I had a bunch of friends that lived close by. I could walk like less than 10 minutes to get to Central Park. It was wild. And then the pandemic hit. When I signed this lease for a 250 square foot apartment, I didn't think that I would be spending all day, every day, working, sleeping, eating inside of this tiny space. I'm not gonna lie, it was really difficult. It was extremely lonely. It was just such a small space for me to be in. My parents would like send me care packages in the mail. But what got me through this tough time in this tiny studio home decor. And thus the journey begins. I'm just kidding. But honestly, this is when I started to get really creative with my space and sharing it online because I just found this community and I was just having so much fun. I got plants, I did DIY projects. This is how the place looked when I moved in, and this is what it looked like when I moved out. I truly just let my mind run free in here. Like looking back on it, I'm like, well, it's a bit much, Casey, but I had so much fun that it was just totally worth it. So after a bit of decorating and sharing, I decided to enter Apartment Therapy's Small Cool contest, and I won in the tiny bracket. I think I have a photo of myself when I read the email. I was shocked. I called my parents. I was like, what? But this led to a bigger following and a bunch of media outlets picking up stuff. I was in the New York Post. I remember going to the bodega and crying with the bodega man because I was in the New York Post. And I'm just so grateful for everything that came from that experience. In terms of cons, the apartment itself obviously was very small, and it was also very old. It was crooked, like things would just like roll down from one side of the studio to the other side. And it was also just like a tint of yellow, you know, like it was just, everything felt yellow. Every time I went to turn the oven on, the fire alarm would also go off, which was super fun. But because this place has such a very special place in my heart, I'm gonna go ahead and give it an 8 out of 10. So as I mentioned, living in the studio was quite lonely, and at the end of the lease, I just decided that living alone wasn't for me, or it just wasn't a journey that I wanted to continue on after living alone during the pandemic. And when the opportunity came to move in with Marilyn and Marcella, 2 of my closest friends, I like jumped at the opportunity and we were so excited, and I have no regrets about that. I think that living alone in New York can be so empowering and so amazing, but it just wasn't for me at that time. Personally, I like having a giant sleepover with my friends where we all get our own room, but I also think I'm in a really unique and lucky situation where we all get along really well and we're all pretty similar in terms of like cleanliness and how we work in a home. Anyways, apartment 4 was in Brooklyn Heights, and she was a beaut. We got this one in December of 2020, so it was definitely a pandemic deal. I paid $14.50 a month for my room. So my New York City dream was to have a fireplace, and this apartment had that. Not a real fireplace, but just a little outline of one. It had a super modern feel and appliances, and it had these beautiful windows with like wood lining. If you haven't noticed, I'm a sucker for a beautiful window. The neighborhood was also incredible. It was walking distance from Brooklyn Bridge Park. There were tons of shops and cafes, really cute bodegas. The living space was quite small, especially for 3 people and for 3 people who love to host. But I took that as a challenge to see how I could make the best use of the space. One thing about me, I love a small space challenge. Like I don't mind being in a small space because I look at it as like a little equation where I'm like, how can I make the best use of this? Enter Le Dining Nook. When I shared the process of making the dining nook, it went viral, and rightfully so, because this little nook put in work. So we had that section. Instead of a TV, we mounted a projector. My dad helped me, and it was one of my favorite projects. We also got a love seat instead of a full couch, and it lost its legs by the time we moved out, but we made it work. Overall, it was small, but I just really loved how this apartment came to be. I think I'm definitely looking at it through like a nostalgic lens, but I'm gonna go ahead and give this place a 9 out of 10. They did raise our rent $1,500, so we had to skedaddle right on out of there. Which brings me to apartment 5, our current apartment. It's also in Brooklyn. I still live with Marilyn and Marcella, and I pay $14.50 a month. The road to this place was a rough one for sure. By the time our last lease ended, we didn't find a place that we loved. We didn't want to overpay, so we ended up actually putting all of our things in storage and just waiting until we found an apartment that we loved. That's also when I lived with Ryan for the summer. I'm gonna rate that experience a 10 out of 10, but seriously, it was a really good time. In the end, I got this apartment by quoting ABBA on the phone to a broker saying, "Take a chance on me. Take a chance. Honey, I'm still free." And I'll never let anyone forget it. It's much larger than our old home. We have this really sweet outdoor space. I have the smallest room, and it is pretty small. My closet's pretty small, but I have these beautiful windows that bring in a ton of sunlight, and if we've learned anything from this video, it's that I love windows. I don't love the area as much as our old place, but I still love it. In terms of cons, the radiator here drives me insane. The pipes and the walls, I've never heard such loud noises. And when we first moved here, I had a really tough time sleeping. Still kind of do. I'm not gonna give it a rating because I haven't lived here long enough, but I do think it's a great find and I'm happy that we ended up here. Let me know if you guys want to see an apartment tour video of this apartment and of my room. I'm planning to make more videos on apartments and home decor and just like my little slice of life living in New York City. And again, I'm just so excited to be here. I've been wanting to make a YouTube for the longest time and it just feels like we're here. So I hope you follow along. Thanks for watching and I'll see you soon. How do I turn this thing off? Oh.